before the events of Period 1. Europe was in the Middle Ages, a time where civilization was suspended. Period 1 spans the years 1450 to 1648, where the beginning marks the end of the Middle Ages and the birth of a new age. To put these dates in perspective, remember that in 1453 Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, and in 1648 the Treaty of Westphalia was signed. Period 1 deals with three main topics: the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, and the Wars of Religion, the growth of European nation-states, and the birth of science. Some of these topics are a collection of achievements, while some are a collection of events. Key Concept 1.1: The rediscovery of works from ancient Greece and Rome, and observations of the natural world changed many Europeans' view of their world. Part 1: A revival of classical text led to new methods of scholarship and new values in both society and religion. Italian Renaissance humanists, who believed that attaching prime importance to the human rather than the divine or the supernatural matters, promoted this revival in classical literature. Some Renaissance humanists furthered the values of secularism, the principle of separation of the state from religious institutions, and individualism, a social theory favoring freedom of action for individuals over collective or state control. The revival, spread by the printing press, challenged the institutional power of universities and the Catholic Church. This shifted education away from primary focus on theological writings towards classical texts and new methods of scientific inquiry. Part 2: The invention of printing promoted the dissemination of new ideas. The invention of the printing press in the 1450s aided in spreading the Renaissance beyond Italy, starting the Northern Renaissance, and encouraging the growth of vernacular literature, which would eventually contribute to the development of national cultures. Protestant reformers, such as Martin Luther, used the printing press to disseminate their ideas, which spurred religious reform and helped it become widely established. Part 3: The visual arts incorporated the new ideas of the Renaissance and were used to promote personal, political, and religious goals. In the Italian Renaissance, rulers and popes concerned with enhancing their prestige commissioned paintings and architectural works based on classical styles. The Northern Renaissance retained a more religious focus, which resulted in more Christian humanism that based the values of humanism off of Christian faith. Mannerist and Baroque artists employed distortion, drama, and illusion in their work. Monarchies, city-states, and the Church commissioned these works as a means of promoting their own stature and power. Part 4: New ideas in science based on observation, experimentation, and mathematics challenged classical views of the cosmos, nature, and the human body, although existing traditions of knowledge and the universe continued. New ideas and methods in astronomy led individuals such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton to question the traditional knowledge and to develop a heliocentric view of the cosmos. Anatomical and medical discoveries by physicians, including William Harvey, presented the body as an integrated system, challenging the traditional theory of the body by Galen. Francis Bacon and René Descartes defined inductive and deductive reasoning and promoted experimentation and the use of mathematics, which could ultimately shape the scientific method. Alchemy and astrology continued to appeal to elites and some natural philosophers. At the same time, many people continued to believe that the cosmos was governed by spiritual forces. Key Concept 1.2: Religious pluralism challenged the concept of a unified Europe. Part 1: The Protestant and Catholic Reformations fundamentally changed theology, religious institutions, culture, and attitudes towards wealth and prosperity. Christian humanism, embodied in the writings of Erasmus, employed Renaissance learning in the service of religious reform. Reformers Martin Luther and John Calvin criticized Catholic abuses and established new interpretations of Christian doctrine and practice. Responses to Luther and Calvin included religious radicals, such as Anabaptists, and other groups, such as German peasants. The Counter-Reformation, exemplified by the Jesuit order and the Council of Trent, revived the Church but cemented the division within Christianity. Part 2: Religious reform both increased state control of religious institutions and provided justifications for challenging state authority. Monarchs and princes, such as the English rulers Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, initiated religious reforms from the top down in an effort to exercise greater control over religious life and morality. Some Protestants, including the Calvinists and the Anabaptists, refused to recognize the subordination of the Church to the secular state. Religious conflicts became a basis for challenging the monarch's control of religious institutions. Part 3. Conflicts among religious groups overlap with political and economic competition within and among states. Issues of religious reform worsened conflicts between the monarchy and the nobility, as in the French Wars of Religion. Habsburg rulers confronted an expanded Ottoman Empire, while attempting unsuccessfully to restore Catholic unity across Europe. States exploited religious conflicts to promote political and economic interests. A few states, such as France with the Edict of Nantes, allowed religious pluralism in order to maintain domestic peace. Key Concept 1.3. Europeans explored and settled overseas territories, encountering and interacting with indigenous populations. Part 1. European nations were driven by commercial and religious motives to explore overseas territories and establish colonies. European states sought direct access to gold, spices, and luxury goods as a means to enhance personal wealth and state power. The rise of mercantilism gave the state a new role in promoting commercial development and the acquisition of colonies overseas. Christianity was a stimulus for exploring, as governments and religious authorities sought to spread the faith, and for some it served as a justification for the subjugation of indigenous civilizations. Part 2. Advances in navigation, cartography, and military technology enabled Europeans to establish overseas colonies and empires. Some examples are the compass, the sternpost rudder, the lateen rig, and guns. Part 3. Europeans established overseas empires and trade networks through coercion and negotiation. The Portuguese established a commercial network along the African coast, in South and East Asia, and in South America in the late 1400s and throughout the 1500s. The Spanish established colonies across the Americas, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, which made Spain a dominant state in Europe in the 1500s. The Atlantic nations of France, England, and the Netherlands followed by establishing their own colonies and trading networks to compete with Portuguese and Spanish dominance in the 1600s. The competition for trade led to conflicts and rivalries among European powers in the 1600s and the 1700s. Part 4. Europe's colonial expansion led to a global exchange of goods, flora, fauna, cultural practices, and diseases, resulting in the destruction of some indigenous civilizations, a shift towards European dominance, and the expansion of the slave trade. The exchange of goods shifted the center of economic power in Europe from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic states. The exchange of new plants, animals, and diseases, the Columbian Exchange, created economic opportunities for Europeans and in some cases facilitated European subjugation and the destruction of indigenous peoples, particularly in the Americas. Europeans expanded the African slave trade in response to the establishment of a plantation economy in the Americas and demographic catastrophes among indigenous peoples. Key Concept 1.4. European society and the experiences of everyday life were increasingly shaped by commercial and agricultural capitalism, notwithstanding the continued existence of medieval social and economic structures. Part 1. Economic change produced new social patterns while traditions of hierarchy and status continued. Innovations in banking and finance promoted the growth of urban financial centers and money economy. The growth of commerce produced a new economic elite, which related to traditional landholding elites in different ways in Europe's various geographic regions. Established hierarchies of class, religion, and gender continue to define social status and perceptions in both rural and urban settings. Part 2. Most Europeans derived their livelihood from agriculture and oriented their lives around the seasons, the village, or the manor, although economic changes began to alter rural production and power. Subsistence agriculture was the rule in most areas, with 3 crop field rotation in the north and 2 crop rotation in the Mediterranean. For the most part, farmers paid rent and labor services for their lands. The price revolution contributed to the accumulation of capital and the expansion of the market economy through the commercialization of agriculture, which benefited large landowners in Western Europe. As Western Europe moved towards a free peasantry and commercial agriculture, serfdom was prominent in the East, where nobles continued to dominate economic life on large estates. The attempts of landlords to increase their revenues by restricting or abolishing the traditional rights of peasants led to revolt. Part 3. Population shifts and growing commerce caused the expansion of cities, which often placed stress on their traditional and political social structures. The population recovered to the level seen before the Black Plague in the 16th century, and continuing population pressures contributed to the uneven price increases. Agricultural commodities increased more sharply than wages, reducing living standards for some. Migrants to the cities challenged the ability of merchant elites and craft guilds to govern, and strained resources. Social dislocation, along with the shifting authority of religious institutions during the Reformation, left city governments with the task of regulating public morals. Part 4. The family remained the primary social and economic institution of early modern Europe and took several forms, including the nuclear family. Rural and urban households worked as units, with men and women engaging in separate but complementary tasks. The Renaissance and the Reformation raised debates about female education and women's roles in the family, church, and society. From the late 16th century forward, Europeans responded to economic and environmental challenges, such as the Little Ice Age, by delaying marriage and childbearing. This European marriage pattern restrained population growth and ultimately improved the economic condition of families. Part 5. Leisure activities continued to be organized according to the religious calendar, and the agricultural cycle remained communal in nature. Key Concept 1.5. The struggle for sovereignty within and among states resulted in varying degrees of political centralization. Part 1. The new concept of the sovereign state and secular systems of law played a central role in the creation of new political institutions. New monarchies laid the foundation for a centralized modern state by establishing monopolies on tax collection, military force, and the dispensing of justice, and gaining the right to determine the religion of their subjects. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, which marked the effective end of the medieval ideal of universal Christendom, accelerated the decline of the Holy Roman Empire by granting princes, bishops, and other local leaders control over religion. Across Europe, commercial and professional groups gained in power and played a greater role in political affairs. Part 2. The competitive state system led to new patterns of diplomacy and new forms of warfare. Following the Peace of Westphalia, religion declined in importance as a cause for warfare among European states. The concept of the balance of power played an important role in structuring diplomatic and military objectives. Advances in military technology led to new forms of warfare, including greater reliance on infantry, firearms, mobile cannon, and more elaborate fortifications, all financed by heavier taxation and requiring a larger bureaucracy. New military techniques and institutions tipped the balance of power towards states able to marshal sufficient resources for the new military environment. Part 3. The competition for power between monarchs and corporate and minority language groups produced different distributions of governmental authority in European states. The English Civil War was a conflict among the monarchy, parliament, and other elites over their respective roles in the political structure. Monarchies seeking enhanced power faced challenges from nobles who wished to retain traditional forms of shared governance and regional autonomy. Within states, minority local and regional identities based on language and culture led to resistance against the dominant national group. This period changes Europe and sets it on its course for world domination.